10 conference championship appearances, 4 Super Bowls, one of the greatest defensive lines ever, and a Hall of Fame quarterback. The Vikings have the most playoff appearances of any NFL team without a Super Bowl win. This is a tale of a team that kept getting so close but could never finish it off. Despite having the best record in the NFL from 1969 to 1976, they went 0-4 in the most important game. The Vikings have faced a lot of heartbreak, but today I'm just focusing on their Super Bowl appearances. Entering Super Bowl IV, they were 13.5-point favorites, a massive spread despite facing a great Kansas City Chiefs team. But the AFL was still seen as inferior, even though the Jets had pulled off the infamous upset the previous year. It wasn't that surprising they were favourites though. Minnesota led the NFL in total points scored and fewest points allowed, averaging less than 10 per game. After allowing 24 points in the season opener, they didn't allow more than 14 for the rest of the season. They won 12 straight games by an average score of 29-8. The defense was elite, and that would be true throughout much of the 70s. In this Super Bowl, they were led by quarterback Joe Kapp. He was tough. So tough, he got the nickname Indestructible, for his willingness to lower his shoulder into defenders instead of sliding. So how does a team with the best offense and defense lose 24-7 when they're 2 touchdown favourites? Firstly, it seems the Vikings were outcoached by Hank Stram. Stram had identified the Viking secondary liked to play far off from receivers because the defensive line was just so good at pressuring the quarterback. So he decided to double team defensive ends Jim Marshall and Carl Eller and had Len Dawson throw mainly short passes. He also exploited the defensive line's aggressiveness with trap plays.
65 horsepower trap. That might pop wide open, Rats.
And the Vikings failed to adjust. But what happened to that number 1 offense? 5 turnovers sure didn't help. That was thanks to the massive Buck Buchanan and Curly Culp lining up in front of center Mick Tingelhoff. They were 30 to 40 pounds heavier, so they could just overpower him. The Chiefs defense, that led the AFL in fewest points allowed, today held the Vikings to just 67 rushing yards, forcing 3 interceptions and 3 fumbles. Safety Carl Kosulki said, "We made more mental mistakes in one game than we did in one season." Saying all this, the Vikings would beat the Chiefs opening day the next season with virtually the same roster, so I don't know how to fully explain that. What was clear was that the offense simply failed to produce anything. They didn't even convert a third down till the third quarter. As for the defense, as dominant as the Purple People Eaters were, they were undersized for their era. The big physical O-lines they would face in the Super Bowls just pushed them around, and the Chiefs were able to rush for 151 yards. It would be a reoccurring theme, which leads us to Super Bowl VIII. By the way, if you're new here, welcome. This is NFL Unveiled, and if you like old school football, you're in the right place, because that's all we talk about. The Dolphins, who finished 3rd in rushing that year, had just completed the perfect season the previous year, but were arguably even better, yet the Purple People Eaters were still dominating, as the defense ranked 2nd in the league in fewest points allowed. But the Dolphins' O-line matched up very well against the Vikings. Zonka would steal the show with the help of Jim Kick and Mercury Morris. Together they formed a ground game the Vikings had no answers for, just brute force, bigger, tougher, and more physical in the trenches. Zonka would rush for a then record 145 yards on 33 carries as he won Super Bowl MVP. So similar to the Chiefs, the Dolphins used the Vikings' aggression on defense to their advantage. With the use of misdirection, the Vikings would bite on the Dolphins' fake moves. And when they eventually adjusted, the Dolphins just overpowered them with their size. The defense had been neutralized again, with the Dolphins rushing for 196 total yards as they put up 24 unanswered points. The offense were suffocated by the so-called no-name defense. In back-to-back Super Bowls, the Vikings had put up 0 points in the first half, ultimately losing 24-7. The following year, the Vikings returned and hopefully learnt from their mistakes. Unfortunately for them, they were facing the greatest dynasty of all time, a Steelers team anchored by their defense, which led the league with the fewest points allowed. But the Vikings' defense still ranked 3rd. It was about to be a defensive battle. And it was, but like their first Super Bowl, turnovers would kill the Vikings. They had 5 in this game, and 15 across 4 Super Bowls. A botched handoff between Fran Tarkenton and running back Dave Osborne gave the Steelers their first points with a safety. Now I know this is an all-time great dynasty, but the consistent underperformance of the offense, despite being good in the regular season, is just baffling. At least put up some points. Fran Tarkenton completed 42% of his passes for 102 yards and 3 interceptions, which left him with a passer rating of 14.1, and his stats in the other games for the most part weren't that good either. And get this, across 3 Super Bowls, the Vikings offense had 2 scoring drives, so no surprise the Steelers would win 16-6. Entering the 1975 season, the Vikings were aging, but the defense still ranked 1st in the NFC. Fran Tarkenton had thrown for just shy of 3,000 yards, 17 touchdowns and only 8 interceptions, and running back Chuck Foreman rushed for a career-high 1,155 yards and 13 touchdowns. But the Raiders lost just 1 game all year and had the highest win percentage of any team from 1963 to 1975. Despite the Raiders' rush attack ranking just 10th in yards, They ran 52 times for 266 yards, once again exposing a massive weakness of the Vikings. That would be the third time the Viking Super Bowl opponent ran for 50 plus times against them. While the Vikings put up a team best 14 points, yeah, slow clap for that, for the fourth time, they failed to score in the first half. The Raiders, on the other hand, put up 16 points and 288 yards, and they finished the game with a Super Bowl record of 429 yards, so they easily won 32-14. But how did this keep happening? Fran Tarkenton had almost every quarterback record at the time. They had one of the greatest defensive lines ever, and a Hall of Fame coach. It's true the AFC was a much stronger conference in the 70s, but I don't think that fully answers it. Firstly, the offense was abysmal in each Super Bowl. As mentioned, they never held a lead or even scored a point in the first half. They also had 15 turnovers. As for the defense, they were better built to defend the pass and got pushed around by these physical O-lines. These are the rushing yards they gave up each game. And this is just a side point, but Bud Grant was old school, pretty stoic. He didn't want his players showing much emotion. The mentality was like, act like you've been there before. But after the first and second loss, that might have been a negative.
Now, all week long, I've been reading about the Buffalo Bills saying the last 3 Super Bowls are history, we won't think about them. That's exactly wrong. You have to think about them. The moments were too big. Now, I remember my first trip to the Super Bowl. A lot of my teammates had been there 3 times. And the first time that we got behind, I remember running up and down the sideline, trying to rally the troops, trying to get them back together, saying, hey, we can get back in this game. We've done it many times before. But somehow I could see in their eyes, not only the players, but the coaches too, that they were thinking, here we go again, and we never got back into the game.
The Vikings fan base have suffered a lot since their inception. 4 Super Bowl losses, countless playoff heartbreaks, and moments that seem destined for glory, only to end in disaster. And yet, they keep waiting, because one day, the wait might finally be worth it.